Hey friends, welcome to Flight Test. I'm Josh. Today is a special day because together we're going to be building the FT Simple Stick. Now if you're not familiar with the FT Simple Stick, it's basically a blast from the past. There was a really iconic model in my childhood called the Ugly Stick. I really wanted to bring this back, but there's also been many amazing variants since then, like the Ultra Stick. What I wanted to do is take all that history, put it together in a very easy build experience, and we affectionately call it the Simple Stick. Now if you're also not familiar with our Simple Series airplanes build in about 2 hours. They're incredibly easy to assemble, easy to build, and also easy to fly. We try not to make the build experience or the flight experience something that's intimidating, but also something that can easily be shared with your friends and family. Now the difference with the Simple Stick is that it's fully aerobatic and also has a symmetrical airfoil. So that means you're going to be able to explore all the incredible aerobatics that the original Ultra Stick and Ugly Stick originally could do. Along with building the Simple Stick today, I'm also going to show you how to install the FT Aura 5. The FT Aura 5 is a control board that will enable you to fly on wind and also have a great beginner experience if you're new to the hobby, and you'll also be able to explore really cool features like launch assist and level assist. If you guys want to cut your build time in half, you can support us by going and buying your speedboat kit either on our store or at your local hobby shop and cut your build time to about 2 hours. But also, we are providing free downloadable plans so you can build along with me in Scratch Build, and your build time is going to be more like 4 hours. Now the FT Simple Stick flies off the Power Pack B. If you guys choose to use our new FT Radial Power Pack B, you're not only going to have the benefit of a lot of power and great efficiency, but this is also force self capable, which means you're going to have an incredible aerobatic experience. So let's go ahead and get our materials in order and we'll get started. So in this portion of the build, we're going to be showing you how to build the wings of your FT Simple Stick. The first thing you're going to want to do is gather the parts for your wings. We're going to go ahead and pop those out and identify them. Now that we have our main pieces of our wing popped out, let's just take a moment to make sure we have them identified and also that you're ready to build along with me with the exact pieces that are shown here. So we have our left and right main portion of our wings, we have our center spar, and we have our outer spars. The piece right here is actually going to be used as a gauge for our leading and trailing edge so we get the proper curve for our symmetrical wing. Now that we have all our pieces, let's go ahead and clear out the channels that we're going to need. We're going to need to clear out the channels on the trailing edge of our main wing, inside both sets of our spars, and also we can crack apart our wing gauge. Once I do this, I'm going to lay this out. Feel free to pause your video so that you can make sure that your wing looks exactly like mine. A really cool tip to make sure that you can clear out your channels without going all the way through the paper on the other side is to simply sand down or dull the tip of your razor blade on a piece of concrete or with rough sandpaper. Just make sure that you don't cut yourself doing this. We want to go ahead and take our razor blade about 3/4 of the way through the foam, making sure we don't go through the paper on the other side. Once you've gone ahead and carefully cut down through the foam, you can then fold the foam over 180 degrees and use your fingernails to easily peel out your foam. Now that we have our reliefs on our trailing edge of our wing, we're going to do the exact same process on the other side. For cutting the channels on our main spars, we're first going to go ahead and do a score cut down just above the paper on the other side, and then we're going to fold it 180 degrees and remove the foam, making sure that we don't leave any excess foam behind. Now if there's a little bit of residual foam on there, don't worry about that. You can always go back with a razor blade and clean that out later before you glue it together. Alright, so we have our main spar done. We're now going to go ahead and do our other side with the exact same process. Simply score right down through the spars, making sure we don't go through both pieces of paper. Fold it over 180 degrees. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pop out all the reliefs we need for the servo holes and for the center section of the wing. So let's go ahead and take a moment here to check out all of our parts to make sure your parts match ours exactly. We have our main spar here with all the channels relieved, along with our outer spar pieces that look the exact same. We've also removed the material for our C-folds on our trailing edges of our wings, and we've gone along, we popped out all of our servo reliefs and our center reliefs to make sure our servos can pass through nice and easy. Go ahead and feel free to pause the video to make sure that your pieces look exactly the same, and then we'll go on to our next step. So now that we have all of our pieces cut out and we have the proper pieces weeded, let's go ahead and take our 3D spars and put them to the side, and we're going to put our attention towards the main wing. Go ahead and take both pieces of your main wing and flip them over so the trailing edge is pointing towards you. We're now going to take our 2 pieces of our wings and we're going to tape them together, making sure that they line up exactly with each other. An easy way to do this is to put your tape on one side of the wing and smooth it out. And then to lift it up, press it into the other piece. Line it up here. There goes one, there's 2. We can then come back with our razor blade and cut off the excess. Now that we have our sides taped together, let's flip it over. We're going to open up the half of our wing, and then we're going to place glue right along the center section here. You don't need to put glue where each fold is going to be. That's going to make it even easier for your folds to give you that airfoil shape. So for our Flite Test glue gun, I'm going to be using most of the build with it set on medium. Just going to skip over that seam, skip over that seam. Just a little bit more. There we go. As we lay it down, you're going to notice that it squeezes out. Just take a scrap piece of foam and wipe off the excess. We're going to give this about a minute to dry. Now that our center section is dried, we're going to rotate the wing 180 degrees, and we're going to go ahead and do our C-fold. A C-fold is where the bottom and the top plate match up parallel to each other, and it also seals with a nice piece of paper on the back end. This is going to make our wing really durable and at the same time give it a nice finished edge. We're going to go ahead and do a test bend on all 4 pieces of our C-fold here just to make sure that it bends around nice and neat. Sometimes foam's a little bit thinner and thicker, especially if you're scratch building here and not using maker foam. So we're just going to make sure that our gaps are perfect. We're going to come along with our hot glue. I'm going to put down a simple bead. I'm just going to go ahead and do 2 sections at a time. Notice that when I do my C-fold that I fold it over, but I make sure that that back edge is vertical. I don't try to push it in too far or out too far. This is going to give us a nice finished look. There's 1. There's 2. Just have a little relief right there. And the same process on the other side. You don't have to worry about putting too much glue on this. A little glue goes a long way. There's 1. And there's 2. Now that our trailing edge is done, we're going to go ahead and crack the middle seam where our leading edge is going to be and do a double bevel cut. Easy way to do this is to take it to the very edge of the table and just make sure that you have that full motion. Now in our speed build kits, the seam line is automatically on this line, so it should bend very easily for you. To do a double bevel cut, we're going to use our razor blade, and what we're going to do is we're not going to hold it 90 degrees like you see here, and we're also not going to go very flat. We're going to go a little bit past 45 degrees, and we're going to keep the edge of the razor blade just above the paper on the center section. By doing this, we're going to be able to have the blade glide nice and easy right through the foam. Anytime that maybe it wanders a little bit, you can always go back for another swipe. Now a lot of times people get intimidated by this, but don't worry, you can always practice on a scrap piece of foam, and this is going to be on the inside of the wing, so you can go back a couple different times. If you're really nervous about using a razor blade, you can also use a piece of sandpaper on a wooden block and you can sand this down. I'd recommend if you're going to do that, use about 80 grit sandpaper. The important thing is don't go through the paper in the middle of your fold. So there's another way to do this, and you can do this off the table if you don't want to hold it up in the air here. And I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that now. Lay your piece of foam flat on the table, and once again, using your razor blade past a 90-degree angle, more like 40 to 50 degrees, we're going to go ahead and start right at the edge of where that fold is. And all I'm looking at is making sure that I'm keeping just above the paper in the middle. If you go through, it's not the end of the world. You can easily fix that with a piece of tape. There we go. So now when you fold it over, you're going to see that you have a nice bevel cut. Now that we have our double bevel cuts, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a practice fold over this wing to make sure it gets its shape on the leading edge. To do this, all we're going to do is support the lower edge, and we're going to slowly work the bottom surface of the wing to give it a nice sharp angle. Notice I'm kind of keeping my hands wide open as I fold this down almost 90 degrees. Now if this gives you a lot of resistance, especially before you get past that 90-degree mark, go back and cut your bevel cuts just a little bit deeper. That looks really good. Now that we have that, we're going to go ahead and take a barbecue skewer that we have included in our kit, and we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of a drag right through our score cuts that are on your plans are marked in red. And we're not going to go all the way to the paper. We're just going to go ahead and just crease in the paper very, very lightly. Now this is an important thing to not get too carried away with, because if you do, it's going to make the wing just a little bit on the weak side and kind of make it a little bit blocky. So just go ahead and just crease that top inch of the paper. I'm only pushing about 1/16 or about 1.5 millimeters into the actual foam itself. Do this on all four sides. There we go. Once you've done that, you're going to notice that you can easily take each piece of foam and you can kind of roll it up to give it a natural airfoil shape. We don't want to go ahead and try to go off of our own kind of feeling for the airfoil. We want to use these gauges here to make sure that we have kind of an indicator. So the first thing I want you to do is just kind of gently roll this up so it naturally, when I hold my fingers down, it naturally holds its shape roughly just a little bit above the foam. We don't want the foam to force it up. We want the foam to simply say, this is where I want you to rest. I'm just going to go ahead and take a little piece of tape, and I'm just going to tape these two sides together. There we go. Alright, all we need to do is just rest that little foam gauge right underneath, and we're not going to be pushing here, we're going to be pushing right where the spar is going to go to hold that down. Once that you see it's not too tight, we'll go ahead and take our hot glue gun, and we're just going to put a thin little ribbon of glue right down on that seam. Now once we have that little ribbon of glue, it's really important that we hold down our fingers right where the spar is, not on the leading edge. We want the spar to be flat up against the table and the trailing edge to be lifted up about the thickness of one sheet of foam. We're going to hold this for about 30 or 40 seconds, and then we're going to move our gauge to the leading edge of the wing and do the exact same process. Now that our trailing edge is done, we're going to go ahead and put the gauge just in front of the leading edge here, line it up on the hinge line. Same process as before. You're going to notice it's a sharper angle because there's not as much distance between the crease line and the leading edge. But we still want to make sure that we have that natural fold kind of working in our favor, where it's not really pushing hard against it, it's just simply resting on it. That looks really good. Go ahead and take our hot glue gun. Again, press a thin ribbon right down in the middle. And once again, we're going to hold down our fingers right on the spar, keeping that flat hard against the table, and we're going to let it dry to 30 to 40 seconds. We're going to repeat this process now on the front side of the spar, and then on the back side of the spar as we work towards the ailerons. Alright, so our bottom surface of the wing is done. Let's go ahead and move it back one more slot. This time it's going to just be favoring the leading edge on the other side of the wing. And we can always go up and kind of roll that up and make it relax so it's not pushing too hard against here and we have our shape. That looks really good. And as before, our fingers are going down right over that spar and holding it in place for a good 30 or 40 seconds. Our last fold with our gauge is going to go right on the hinge line with where our aileron is going to be. And we're just going to need to sight this up lightly, but the easiest way to do is by focusing right on the back trailing edge here on the center portion of our wing skin. That sits nice and neat. We're going to go ahead and hold this last step for about 30 or 40 seconds, and then we're going to move on to build our spars. So for the spars, the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go ahead and do a practice A-fold. An A-fold is where the side cheeks are on top or above the bottom plate. A above. So to do this, we're going to go ahead and leave the side plates of our spar firmly against the table, and we're going to rotate our bottom plate up while pushing down against the table to 90 degrees. It's really important that you do a practice fold first just to make sure that your gap is clear of any extra foam, and also that you can easily get up to 90 degrees without having to fight it too much. Let's go ahead and do that on both sides. I oftentimes just kind of like to rock it up into place, and that just kind of helps seat it really, really nicely. Just like that. Now that we've done our practice fold, we're ready to come back with our glue. To do an A-fold, we're going to favor most of the glue on the bottom of the side plate rather than shoving it just in the gap. So you're going to notice I'm going to turn my hot glue gun at about a 45-degree angle, and I'm putting most of that thin bead of glue right on the bottom of the side plate. And now I can go up to 90 degrees. And I'm going to hold that for 30 to 40 seconds. Make sure that you're pressing firmly down against the table. This is going to give you a really nice square edge. We're going to repeat the exact same process now on the other side. Again, favoring most of that glue right on the bottom of the side plate as we go through. And right back up to 90 degrees. Once this is dried, we're going to go ahead and do the exact same process on our other two smaller spars. Now that we have our three spars done, we're going to go ahead and put them in position and glue them in place. The first one we're going to want to position is the most important, and that's the big spar. We're going to go ahead and line this up, and you're going to notice it lines up perfectly with the center section and also our two servo holes. Once you've placed this down and you're happy with the fit, go ahead and flip it over 180 degrees. And we're going to put a nice bead of glue right on the bottom. You don't need to get too crazy. Just put it right down in the center, understanding that some of it's going to squeeze out. Flip it over 180 degrees. And what I like to do is just kind of wiggle it back and forth, letting the glue spread out. And then I'm going to go right along the lines, making sure that it lines up perfectly with both of our servo holes and also our center section in the middle. We're going to give this about 30 seconds to dry, and then we're going to go ahead and glue our outer panels. Same process as before, we're going to do a quick test fit, this time on the outer panel. You're going to notice that it lines up really nicely with the very edge of our wing. Little wiggle, and push it down in place. Last section, wiggle, and set it in place. With each section that you do, make sure that your spar lines exactly up with the score cuts on the bottom of the wing. With our spars glued in place, we're going to go ahead and rotate this 180 degrees. And then we're just going to go ahead and do a quick test fold here where we take our top skin and with our hands spread nice and evenly so we don't dent the foam, we're going to rotate this over. When we do our test fold, it's really important that we don't worry about the rockiness of the spar. It's that we focus down on the main spar area to make sure it's firmly against the table, and that the top skin of the wing spar area is also parallel to the table. Now that our test fold is done, we're going to focus our glue on the leading edge here and then on both sides of our main spar. Don't worry about the trailing edge just yet. We're going to go ahead and address that in a minute. Oops. just enough here. There we go. And just like we did on our practice fold, we're going to take this right over the table, and we're going to focus all of our energy right on top of that main spar, making sure it's parallel to the bottom surface of the table, and then also that our wing is down on from tip to tip. We're going to hold this for a good minute, just to make sure everything thoroughly dries. I like to move my hands back and forth on different portions of the wing, just to make sure that I'm not neglecting any certain part of it. Alright, our main spar area is now done. Let's go ahead and flip this over 180 degrees so that the ailerons are pointing towards us and the top surface of the wing is firmly against the table. Our next step here is we're going to go ahead and we're going to glue our trailing edge to the top skin of the wing here. Always make sure before you start a step like this you have plenty of hot glue in your glue gun. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus our nozzle just about 1/8 inch inside the wing so it doesn't squirt out where our hinge line is going to be, and then we're going to hold that against the table. Open this up a little bit. If you have any kind of residual pop out, don't worry, you can always scrape out that extra before it firmly dries. There we go. And let's go ahead and hold this down again with our hands spread wide open, just to make sure that we don't dent the foam when we spread that pressure out evenly. And we're going to hold that for about 30 or 40 seconds, and then we're going to start on our servos and our linkages. You're going to notice now that your wing is nice and dry that you have a beautiful symmetrical airfoil. We're now ready to move on to our electronics, where we put our servos in and get our linkages cut and cut our hinge lines. Now that we're done building our wing, it's now time to put our servos in and our control surfaces. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take a straight edge here and we're going to cut the hinge lines now on the trailing edge of our wings. To do this, we want to make sure that we don't go through the paper on the other side of the surface of the wing. We only create a score cut. Once we've cut our score cut right at the trailing edge, right by our C-fold, we're going to just take this down to the edge of the table and provide a little bit of even pressure and crack it loose. We can then fold this over 180 degrees and cut our bevel cut on the side of the aileron. It's really important on this bevel cut that you cut this greater than about 60 degrees. Because it's an aerobatic airplane, we're going to have a lot of control deflection on this airplane, and we want to make sure that the hinge doesn't bind up the servo. To make your hinges even stronger, I'm going to go ahead and take a scrap piece of foam and I'm going to cut it to a tight little triangle. I'm then going to use hot glue to reinforce this hinge right through the line, and then push it in with a scrap piece of foam board, making sure that I don't have any puddles of hot glue that are going to later bind up my hinge. Let's go ahead and do that now. Notice I'm focusing all my attention right at where the paper meets the foam. I'm going to go right on back, and I'm going to scrape it smooth. There we go. Now one thing I want to make sure is I don't close this hinge until it's dried for at least 30 or 40 seconds. Once we've let the glue thoroughly dry, give your aileron a motion back and forth to make sure you have full deflection and it's not pushing too hard or binding anywhere. If you do have any kind of globs of glue binding it up, go ahead and use this time now and cut those out. We're going to repeat the exact same process now on the other side. Now that our ailerons are done, we're gonna go ahead and put our attention towards our servos. The first thing we wanna do is open up our servos, and these come pre-centered here, so as long as you don't move them back and forth, you should be very, very close to being perfect. With our servos comes a whole bunch of different servo arms. The servo arm we're gonna be choosing today is gonna be the longest single arm that's right here. It's really important whenever we're mounting our servos, we're gonna go ahead and go 90 degrees from each other. So we're gonna have both of our servos, or with the wires going forward, one arm's gonna go to the right, one's gonna go to the left. Using the shortest screw in the pouch, we're gonna go ahead and screw this down in. It's really important to screw down your servo arms because you don't want them popping out in flight. If they pop out in flight, you are going to lose control of that control surface. Here we go. If you haven't already, go ahead and open up that center hole. Use a razor blade or just poke it with your screwdriver. Once we have our servo arm in place, we're gonna go ahead and snake our servo wire right through the spar channel, all the way to the center, and then we're gonna pull it out with a pair of pliers. There we go. For right now, we're only going to pressure fit the servo down into its slot. Later on, we're going to come back and glue that, but we don't want to glue everything in place until we make sure that our push rod and our control horn are the exact dimensions that we want it. Now you're going to notice that our control horns have 3 holes. The hole that we're going to be choosing is going to be the very furthest from the hinge line, or the very top. I like to go ahead and on this one, have my push rod be favoring out towards the wingtip to line up with the outermost hole in my servo arm as directly as possible. Our next step is to go ahead and press this down right over our slot that fits directly into our aileron. And when you do so, make sure that your push rod wire passes through your control horn directly over your hinge line. This is going to give you an even throw both down and up. Rather than using linkage stoppers, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do a Z-bend that's going to give you the ability to go ahead and bend your wire to the exact dimension. Now you have plenty of extra wire, so if it's not the perfect length, don't worry, you can always go back and make another one. To do this, I'm going to go ahead and keep my aileron nice and neutral, which means I'm pushing the whole top surface of the wing against the table, keeping it level. And I'm going to go ahead and put my thumb right on the closest side to the hinge line of the circle. Once I have that, I'm going to simply grip with the pliers right up against my thumbnail. I'm going to bend it straight down to 90 degrees. Once I have my 90 degree bend, I'm going to grab this about 2 or 3 millimeters and I'm going to bend it straight towards the wingtip. This is going to be like what we call a modified Z-bend. The nice thing about a modified Z-bend is it can actually be rotated out of your servo arm to be able to adjust the throws in or out. If you want to make a conventional Z-bend, all you need to do is go ahead and rotate that Z-bend 90 degrees facing towards the leading edge, and it'll make a perfect Z-bend every time. Once we made our bend, we're going to go ahead and cut about 1/4 inch from the edge. And since we haven't glued anything in place, I can lift this up, carefully pass it on through, and then press it in place. Now if at any point that this is too long or too short, you have plenty of extra wire to take another stab at it. It takes a little bit of practice, but once you get this, you're going to be able to make your push rods immediately, whether it's on the field or on your workbench, without the use of linkage stoppers. Now before we glue everything down, I'm going to go ahead and make sure everything's the proper length. My push rod is right over my hinge line, my servo is 90 degrees perpendicular, and that this has no extra bend in it and it's not tight. I'm also pressing the whole surface of the wing against the top surface of the table to make sure that my aileron is totally flat with the top surface of my wing. At this point now, I can go ahead and loosen this up. I'll put a little bead of glue right over my servo horn, and I'll press it down in place. While I'm holding this, I'm going to go ahead and just fill the cavity right here on the very top of my servo with hot glue. Nice thing about that is it's going to hold the servo in place, but also I can easily remove the servo if I need. There we go. We're going to give this a couple minutes to dry because we want it to be nice and hard and not to move at all and lose our adjustment. Once this is fully dried, we're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. Once we have our servo and our control horn in place, I'm going to make sure that our push rod is passing directly over the hinge line through the control horn and that there's no extra binding with our push rod. It's a good idea to always hold the surface of your wing flat up against the table to make sure the aileron is in line with the top surface of the wing. Once we're happy with this, we can go ahead and glue in our control horn. And then our servo. At this point, our wing is now done. We're ready to move on to the next step, which is building our fuselage. We're going to put this aside for now, and we'll come back to it when we're hooking up our electronics. So before we build our fuselage, the first thing we want to do is pop out all the pieces needed and identify them. So let's go ahead and do that now. So I went ahead and popped out the remaining pieces from our kit, which is pretty much everything left for our fuselage and our tail section. The first piece we have is our main fuselage piece. With this piece, we're going to have to remove the foam channels and also glue a couple doublers in. The doublers for the fuselage are located right here, and there's going to be two that are mirrored against each other. We also have our top hatch and our top plate. Now, a really important piece that's going to go inside are our doublers for our servo push rod guides. This is going to be really important so our servo push rods don't flex. I also popped out my tail section and my power pod, which we're going to address later. So my next step here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut down through my score cuts, weed out all the extra foam that I don't need, and then I'm going to go ahead and lay this out again so you can pause it and make sure that your pieces look exactly like mine. Anytime that you see a red line on your plans, that indicates a score cut. For your speed build kits, you're going to see that's cut about halfway through, but I always like to go back through and cut down just a little bit deeper to get a nice square edge and have that foam release real easy. There we go. The easiest way to weed out your cavity is to fold it over 180 degrees and simply roll the piece out with your fingers. With the fuselage, I'm also going to go ahead and peel these top pieces off here. These are going to fold over and give the fuselage a nice finished edge and also make it much stronger. For the hatch, once again, I'm going to go ahead and simply weed this out. You can almost always count on the fact that if you see something about the width of a piece of foam, that section is going to need to be weeded out so it can fold together. If it's double the size of foam, it's most likely going to be a C-fold. For our top plate, we're simply going to go around the perimeter and remove the excess foam. This again is going to seal the open foam on the top of the fuselage and give us a nice finished and strong look. And the last pieces we're going to address right now are going to be our servo guides. All we need to do is simply kind of cut down to the paper and pop the metals out. Alright, so all of our pieces are weeded. Make sure you take your time and pause the video if you need to look at each individual piece and make sure they look just like mine. Once all your pieces are weeded and you're happy to move on, we're going to go ahead and move on to the main portion of the fuselage and also our doublers. Before we glue our doublers in, we want to go ahead and seal this edge over just so it doesn't ever peel and it gives it a nice finished look. The way that we're going to do this, we're going to just do a quick practice fold, kind of establish that angle. We're going to come back with our hot glue and put about an 1/8 inch bead, starting and stopping about a 1/4 inch from the edge. We're then going to rotate this up to the table, count for about 15 seconds, let that little bit extra squeeze out, and then we're going to go down firm on the table and hold it there for about 15 seconds. This is going to let that edge glue firmly up against the side plate of the fuselage and give us a nice finished edge. Same process on the other side, starting and stopping about a 1/4 inch from the edge, taking up 90 degrees to the table, letting that extra squeeze out just a little bit, and folding it down, kind of dragging and pushing straight down against the table, using as your friend to hold that glue and give you a nice sealed edge. Now that we have the top edges of our fuselage sealed off, we can go ahead and place our doublers in place. All we want to do is we want to make sure that the doublers line up exactly over the etch marks right on your plans, and take careful note to note that you're going to have about the width of foam right in front of the fuselage between the doubler and the front of your fuselage. That's completely normal. Once you're happy with that, we're going to go ahead and rotate that over 180 degrees. Put a nice simple bead of glue, tracing the perimeter. A little bit in the middle. Oops. Kind of wiggle it around a little bit, and then take your time to make sure that every part of this lines up right up over the etch marks on your fuselage. You're going to notice some etch lines on our doubler here that could be cut out later. That's actually for our Pontoon Kit. Now, our Simple series has a Pontoon Kit that goes from our Simple Scout, our Simple Cub, and now the Simple Stick. It flies absolutely fantastic off the water, and it's a lot of fun. If you're going to put pontoons on in the future, go ahead and cut that relief out now, and that'll make it so you can slide that doubler in that'll hold onto your pontoons. Same process on the other side. Let's just kind of trace around the perimeter. A little bit in the middle. There we go. We're gonna let these doublers dry for at least 30 seconds, making sure that they don't shift whenever we move. With our doublers in place, we're now going to move on to our push rod guides. Included in your speedboat kit, you're going to see a coffee stir there. We're going to cut this into 4 sections, and then we're going to glue it right over top, making sure that our push rods can glide cleanly through, but also not have too much wiggle room inside the fuselage. With this plane being aerobatic, it's really important that we have a nice firm link between the servo and the control surface. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut this in half, and then cut this in half again. To glue our push rods in, all we need to do is just put a simple little tiny dot, lay our coffee stir in, and then set it down on the table. We're going to do this for all 4 pieces. Now that we have our push rod guides made, we're going to go ahead and take the 2 included push rods that we have in our kit, and we're going to go ahead and snake those through the back slot, both for the elevator side and also the rudder side. I like to kind of move them back and forth a little bit, making a little bit of slop, just so the push rods don't have to fight that. We're going to do this on both sides. With our push rods put on through, we're going to slide on our push rod guides. We're going to put a little bit of glue on each piece of the foam, and then we're going to set each push rod guide right over top of the etch lines on the side plates of our fuselage. Notice that some of them have a little bit of an angle to them, and you're going to have to hold that in until the glue thoroughly dries. That's important just to kind of give us a proper angle so when it goes to the servo, it's hitting at the right angle and giving the most deflection and strength. Same process on the other side. Make sure before we move on that both of your push rods slide freely back and forth. Holding our hand firmly on the doubler, we're going to carefully lift up on the back portion of the fuselage and allow it to crease right at the end of the doubler. This is going to be marked as a blue line on your plans and also an etch line on your fuselage kit. The goal is to lift this up far enough so when we put this into a B-fold and roll this up, that we don't have to push very hard to hold this into place. Once we're happy with the angle up, let's go ahead and practice a couple B-folds. A B-fold is where the side plate is beside the bottom plate. We're always looking at our A-folds and B-folds as the orientation to the top or bottom plate. A being above the bottom plate, B being beside the bottom plate. So in this case, we're going to keep the bottom plate firmly against the table. We're going to rotate up the side plate, keeping it up against the table to 90 degrees. What we should see is a really nice clean fold right on the bottom of the table that's 90 degrees. Once we practice this fold a couple times and made sure that the full side plate is firmly against the bottom plate from the tail to the nose, we're going to go ahead and favor most of our glue on the side of the bottom plate. I like to start and stop about a 1/4 inch from the very edge and put about an 1/8 inch bead of glue. There we go. Going to go ahead and do the same thing before. We're keeping it firmly against the table as we rotate it up 90 degrees. And then now I'm just going to hold this up against the bottom plate, kind of going back and forth. You can always use a square here or a triangle to be able to get that perfect 90-degree angle. Now that we have one side done, we're going to do the exact same process on the other side. Again, keeping that bottom plate firmly against the table, slowly rotating up 90 degrees, and making sure that the whole side plate from the nose to the tip is against the table and against the bottom plate. That looks good. Now that we're happy with that, we're going to focus and start about a 1/4 inch from the edge, about an 1/8 inch bead, all the way to the tail. Back onto the table, back up to 90 degrees. I'm going to kind of hold it there. Then pressing down with my hand and just kind of rolling back towards the tail. And give it about 30 seconds and let it fully cool. Before we glue our top plate in place, we're going to go ahead and fold this portion over here using the same process we did on the front of the nose of the fuselage. A little bit of glue right here. Down to the table, count to 15. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15. Right down. Now I like to kind of slide it forward to get a nice sealed edge. Next we're going to go ahead and do a test fit. To do this, we're going to go ahead and start this piece further up towards the nose than we need it to be. Then we're going to slide it all the way back until the very end of the top plate lines up with the end of the fuselage. That looks really good. Once we're happy with that motion, we're going to make sure we have plenty of glue in our hot glue gun. Again, 1/8 inch bead, this time between the paper and the foam. Same motion as before, slide it into place. Very end meets there. Once we're happy with where everything fits, we're simply going to flip this over right against the table, use the table as our friend, and hold it in place until it's thoroughly dry. Alright, our 30 seconds is done, and this is nice and clean. This top hatch is going to have both an A fold here and a C fold here. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do our C-fold. I'm just going to put a little bit of glue here, a little bit on the paper. Fold it right around 180 degrees, just like we did on the trailing edge of our wing. And we're going to hold that in place until it dries. The next step is we're going to take this to the edge of the table, give us a nice clean edge. Once we're happy with that, I'm going to favor most of my glue right on the top plate here and a little bit on this paper so it makes a nice seal. Right back down to the table, 90 degrees up, give it about 30 seconds to fully cool. Same process on the other side. Kind of favor the paper and favoring that top plate. You're going to notice that we're going to have two lines here. One is our hinge line for our hatch, and the other is going to be where the top of the fuselage and the front of the fuselage bend. This line here, we may want to do a little bit of a score cut, and then crack it open. We're going to want to do roughly a 45-degree cut on both sides. There's one. And there's two. This is going to give us the ability to match up nicely the very angle on our fuselage. I think I need to get a little bit more than what we currently have. There we go. That looks good. Okay. With the front of the fuselage and your hatch against the workbench, take your fuselage and place that right down over top and make sure that you're happy with the fit and that it's nice and flush on all sides. Once you're happy with that, trace the perimeter on the bottoms and the two sides and then repeat the exact same process. One thing I like to do is after we place it down, wait about 10 seconds, then shift it just a little bit, making sure you don't accidentally glue your fuselage to the workbench. You can always scrape the extra glue off later with a scraper. Our next step is to carefully just go ahead and put a little bit of a score cut so that your top hatch is able to easily bend over once we glue down the front portion of our fuselage. Let's go ahead and do a quick test fit. We're going to kind of pinch in both sides, rotate this down, and leave it in place. That looks wonderful. See, that'll naturally open up. Now I'm just going to carefully open up this section, and at this point I'll put a nice bead of glue right down on that bevel and on both sides of the fuselage. Make sure I don't put too much glue down. It goes inside the hinge line and glues our hatch shut. Same process as before, just a little pinch on the hatch, slide it down into place, make it nice and flush, and let it fully dry. Once the front of our fuselage is fully dried, we can now lift this up. And what I like to do is to put a little bead of glue right on that back hinge line and then smear it in just like what we did with our aileron reinforcement hinge to make sure that it doesn't delaminate. To make the hatch easier to open and close, we're just going to take a small piece of tape and make a little pull tab on the top of the hatch to make it easier to grab without denting the foam. We're just going to take about an inch or so of tape, fold over the tab just so it's not sticky. Then tape it down in place. Now we have a nice easy way to be able to open and close our hatch. Next we're going to go ahead and put our fuselage aside for a moment and put our attention towards the tail and the rudder. The first thing we want to do to prepare both our rudder and our elevator is to remove the paper on the leading edge of both our elevator and our rudder, and also the channel for our barbecue skewer to go. This barbecue skewer is going to give us a tremendous amount of strength for our elevator, especially since it's so close to the ground. It may also get splashed by water if you're flying off of floats. So just like before, we're cutting down but not all the way through the paper, and I'm also cutting into this relief area that's about the same width as our barbecue skewer. Also do the same thing on our rudder. Simple little fold, 180 degrees. Carefully pull it towards you. And then we're just going to do what we did before. We're kind of practice getting that paper its own memory to be able to fold over. And then we'll place a bead of glue about 1/8 inch wide. We're then going to rotate this up to the table. Down the rest of the way, and again just a little bit of a pull to kind of give it tension and seal off the edge. Same process on the elevator. We'll go ahead and fold this over 180 degrees, and the first thing I'm going to do is just pull that channel out. There we go. You can also remove the paper. From both sides. Taking the barbecue skewer that's included in the kit, we're going to trim it to length first. I like to just mark that with my nail. Take it down to the workbench. Roll it back and forth. Crack it loose. That test kit looks really good. I'm going to favor a nice bead of glue right against the leading edge of the tail, and then I'm going to press this into place. This whole time I'm keeping the tail nice and flat. I'm not holding it off the table. That way it doesn't have any issues of warping. Once we're happy with that, we're going to do another bead of glue just like we did before. Again, we're 90 degrees up to the table. We'll just kind of roll that around. And yep, that should be just enough. A little bit of pressure, a little bit of sliding forward. And that looks great. Now that our leading edge is done, we're going to go ahead and put a score cut right down through our hinge line. Fold it over 180 degrees. And typically we like to put our bevel on the elevator side. Because this is so thin here, I'm going to go ahead and place that right on the actual stabilizer side. Not going to make any difference, just a little bit more meat and a little bit more strength for the elevator. There we go, we want that to have plenty of room going up and down. My friend Anders is going to fly this later. I want him to have tons of deflection, so I'm actually going to go a little bit more. About 60 plus degrees. There we go. And while we're at it, why don't we just pluck these little guys out. While we have this open and also the bottom facing up towards us, we're going to take our included popsicle stick and we're going to put this down on the bottom here. What that's going to do is it's going to make this area much stronger and also keep this from distressing out right in the middle here. There we go. Notice that I'm favoring outward a little bit just to get as much meat around this area as possible. And just like we do with our ailerons, we're going to go ahead and open this up and put a hot glue reinforcement hinge. Make sure you take a scrap piece of foam, scrape off all the extra that you can so it doesn't bind up on you. Give that a good 30 seconds to dry and we'll move on to the rudder. All we need to do with our rudder, simply score this open, put a bevel hinge right on the rudder side, and again, because this is an aerobatic airplane, we want to have plenty of throw both ways. That looks pretty good. And just like what we did on the ailerons, if we want to make this last a very long time, we can put a bead of glue right down on our hinge line. Always make sure you go back with a scrap piece of foam and scrape off all the excess. So now that we have the rudder and the elevator done, we're now going to install them into the fuselage. The nice thing about this is the table is going to be our friend to help us get the fuselage and the tail perfectly perpendicular to each other. The important thing now is to make sure that you don't have any glue globs in, because when you push this against the table, if you have any glue globs, it's going to dent your foam. So for a test fit, I'm going to simply go ahead and place this right over the elevator and press it down in place. Make sure that you press this down so the bottom of the fuselage and the bottom of the elevator are both flat against the table. Once you're happy with the way this fits, you can flip this 180 degrees. And we repeat the exact same process again. I like to have a little scrap piece of foam, just scrape off that excess on both sides. Give this about 30 or 40 seconds to dry, and make sure that you take your time making sure it's flat against the table on both the elevator and the fuselage, and it'll be perfectly perpendicular. Now that our elevator is thoroughly dried, we're going to go ahead and cut our relief for our rudder. For this, you're going to see two little indent marks on both sides of the top plate of the fuselage. All we need to do is take our ruler and line that up, and without trying to make this in one cut, we're simply going to do a light cut all the way to the front, a little bit more, and one final one through. One more cut, this time lining up the far side. And there's our piece. And just like we did with our elevator, we're going to slide this right down in, eyeball our little slots, little tiny pop, and there she is. We can look at the bottom, and both these tabs should about halfway engage. We're going to have a door saw on the bottom that's going to hold our skid. That skid's going to go ahead and cover up the rest of those two slots. So we can go ahead and sight down this now, and we can notice that our rudder is perfectly perpendicular to our elevator. That's exactly what we want to see, and once you're happy with that, we can put some glue on it and repeat the process. So we'll slide it up. A little bit of glue. A little bit of glue on those low points. Kind of key it in there. Pop it into place. Once it's down into place, we can follow up on both sides with a thin little bead of hot glue, just to give us the most strength possible. Now that we have our elevator and our rudder on, our next step here is to install our control surfaces and our servos. To do this, we want to go ahead and unpackage our two servos. These are our ESO882s from Flite Test. They're also in your B and C power packs. We're going to want to go ahead and do the same thing we did with our ailerons, which is to install a single-sided servo arm opposing each other. Let's go ahead and do that now. These are the servo arms we're going to be using for this application. It's really important whenever we install our control arms that we're going to actually keep them opposing from each other here. Make sure that your servos look just like this, and then we can lock them down with the screw. Now that we have our servo arms installed, we're going to put those aside and look at our control horns. For our control horns, we're going to use the last two remaining control horns that are in our kit, and we're going to slide them on one at a time. Now I prefer to go to the outermost hole on our control horn, and we're going to do this in a way where the wire doesn't have to bend up sharply. So I'm going to go ahead and push this on, just like you see here, and you're going to notice that the wire is on the lower side of the control horn going to the fuselage. That way when we press this into its slot, the wire doesn't have any kind of binding. We're going to do the same process on the other side with our elevator. And the only difference with our elevator is we kind of went out a little bit far, so we're going to want to keep the wire as close to the fuselage as possible. Once we put our control horn on, we can also kind of mold the wire with our fingers and just put a slight little bend in it, so it goes to the control horn a little bit more perpendicular, just like you see here. The important thing that you want to make sure is that the hole of the servo pushrod guide is directly over the hinge line. That's going to give you even deflection both up and down, or in the rudder's case, right and left. Once we're happy with the way everything looks on the back control horn, we're going to go ahead and glue this in now to make sure they don't slide loose when we're gluing our servos. All we need to simply do is lift up the slot, put a bead of glue down, and press it back into place. Give this a good minute to minute and a half without touching it before you move on to the next step. We're going to do the exact same process now on the rudder. Now that our control horns are glued in place, we're going to go ahead and take the push rod from each one, and I'm going to go ahead and go about 2 inches in front of the trailing edge here. And this is going to be a really nice location for our servos to be, and it'll also give us a lot of room for our control board to be installed if you choose to install the FT Aura 5 Lite. All we need to simply do is we're going to grab this and kind of lift it up with our hand. We're going to grab it about 2 inches in front, and we're going to lift it straight up. Once we have it lifted straight up 90 degrees, we're going to grab it about 2 or 3 millimeters right on the bend here, and we're going to fold it straight towards the other side of the fuselage. This is going to make our modified Z-bend that we love so much. Our next step here is to go ahead and trim this about 1/4 inch from the end. And then just to make sure that our 2 tips of our push rods don't touch each other, I'm going to go ahead and grip this one more time with our pliers, and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees to go from a modified Z-bend to a conventional Z-bend. Do this nice and slow so you don't snap your wire. Same exact process on the other side now. We're going to go ahead and grip this. I kind of use these little 2 tab marks made from the Bevel Kit. We're going to flip it straight up. Grip it about 2 or 3 millimeters. And then straight towards the other side. Cut it about 1/4 inch. And our last step is to grip it and then slowly rotate it 90 degrees. And make our Z-bend. Before we go ahead and fit our servos, I'm going to remove our little sticker on this side here. And it's a good idea to clean it with alcohol and to also scuff it up. Scuffing this up with a razor blade or a piece of sandpaper is going to give us the best adhesion possible to make sure that our servos don't come loose. If our servos come loose, it's going to cause us to not have control over that control surface. It's not only bad for the airplane, but it's not very safe either. Alright, all we need to do is simply hold this up. Press this on through. Rotate it down. There we go. And now we can fit this down in here. We want the natural tension of the push rod to kind of depict the height that we're going to have for our patrol rod. That's going to keep it from binding. One side I'm going to go ahead and go a little bit lower, and it's easy to do that with the very first servo you install. That way the push rods, as they go, they're not going to go ahead and contact each other as they move back and forth. Alright, I see where I want to glue this. I'll go ahead and put a nice bead of glue down. Drop it a little bit lower, just a touch lower than I need. And I'm going to press it down in place. Now the other thing I'm going to be doing here is I want to make sure that I have a nice straight rudder on this. The rudder is the first one I'm doing here. And so I'm going to go ahead and look at this, and it's easy to take either a ruler or a square piece of foam and just hold it against the back just to make sure that you don't have any issues with it being caught to the left or the right. That's going to be something that you're going to have to adjust out later. It's just more work. Hold this down for a solid 2 minutes to make sure that the servo is firmly adhered to the side of your fuselage. The other thing you don't want to do is to make any last minute corrections. If you make a last minute motion, what's going to happen is you're going to break that bond of the glue, and it's not going to be as strong for it. Okay, once your 2 minutes has passed, we're going to do the exact same process on the other side, but this time we're going to favor just a little bit higher, making sure that that push rod doesn't go up to meet the bottom of the surface of the wing. This one doesn't have a sticker on this side, so all I need to do is just kind of scratch this up. I really love the Simple series because the floating servo concept makes it really easy to build and takes all the stress out of your linkages. Same process as before. Now I'm choosing to use the outermost hole, and there's a good reason for that. This is an incredibly aerobatic airplane, and I want this to have as much throw as possible. But if you're new to the hobby, you can always start with the innermost hole. You're going to have a very gentle flight experience, and then you can always move it out later simply by just moving your servo arm off, readjusting the hole, and then putting it back on. Just a little rotation's all you need. Rotate it 90 degrees down, just like that. And then we'll go ahead and set this in place. And like I said before, I'm just going to keep this favoring just above the other hole, about a maybe 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch. Happy with the way that looks? A little bit of glue. I'm going to make sure that we're nice and centered on our elevator. We'll hold it in place for about 2 minutes. Our servos are now installed, everything's centered up beautifully. We're ready to move on. One last step I'm going to do before I put my fuselage aside is I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of hot glue reinforcement right where the wing is going to saddle onto the fuselage. The reason for this is the wing is oftentimes going to go on and on many different times. This is a really good tip that you guys can do on other airplanes as well to kind of make this area more durable, so that way as you remove your plane or you adjust things, it doesn't peel the paper away slowly. To do this, we're going to do the exact same process as before, just like we do on our hot glue hinge. We're just going to lay a nice little bead of glue right down over both seams. I'm just going to lift up my hatch so I don't accidentally glue it in. And I'm just going to use like a paintbrush. I'm just going to paint it on there. I'm not as concerned about getting it all scraped off as I am just making sure there's no heavy globs. And then we're going to let that dry in place. There we go. Same process on the other side. I do this on a lot of the airplanes with removable wings now, and it really just helps kind of give them a little bit more longevity. Anytime you have an area that's oftentimes connected or that you're going to always be going for a service, like a hatch or something or a battery tray, paint it with a little bit of hot glue, makes it go a long ways. If you're ever flying off the water, this is also a really good tip where you can go around the surface of your wings and the surface of your tail surfaces to kind of really make them watertight. All right, our fuselage is now done. We're gonna put this aside, we're gonna build our power pod, and then we're gonna come back and finish off the airplane. The first thing we're gonna do with building our power pod is to weed out the channels that we're gonna be using to make our A-fold. Same process as before, we're using a razor blade to cut about 3/4 of an inch down, so we can easily fold this over 180 degrees and peel out the excess foam to create our cavity. Take a moment to make sure that your piece looks exactly like this. This is going to be an A-fold, so an A-fold means that the side plates go above the bottom plate. To do our A-fold, we're going to keep our side plate firmly on the table, and we're going to fold over the bottom plate to make sure that it pushes against the table as well. Make sure you practice this on both sides so you can get a full 90-degree deflection. Once you're happy with the way everything fits, we're going to go one side at a time, placing the glue about 1/4 inch from the edge and favoring it mostly on the bottom of the side plate. Fold this up 90 degrees. We're going to hold it there for about 45 seconds. Really nice thing about our adjustable temp glue gun is if you're used to working faster, you can actually dial back the temperature so it dries quicker, and it helps your build speed up a lot. Same process on the other side. One quick practice fold. That looks wonderful. And again, we're going to favor most of the glue where it's going to give us the strength, which is on the bottom of the side plate. Right back on the table. Rotate to 90 and hold for 45 seconds. Included in our speed build kit is going to be our firewall. This firewall is going to have an open hole on the bottom corner. This is going to be used to pass our wire guides through so that you can have your motor mounted on the surface and then the wires will pass through. Now, many different motors have many different ways of mounting, and you can see that this kind of addresses all of them. The one thing that I want to point out is it's probably best practice to put this in the lower left-hand corner, as if you're in the pilot seat and you're looking from this direction. That way, if you choose to use just a can mount instead of the X mount, you can actually access those holes on the very back, and your wires will naturally go towards this hole. Now, if you mount this backwards, don't worry about it at all. There's no big deal. All you simply need to do is just guide your wires over, and you're only going to lose about 1 inch of length. It's not the end of the world. But for this one, I'm going to go ahead and mount it in the lower left-hand corner. Now, if you use our included X mounts on our radio power packs, it doesn't matter which side you favor. Now that we've test fitted this, I'm going to put a nice healthy bead of glue right on the bottom of the foam. I'm going to mount my firewall with the very bottom of the firewall flush. I'm going to press it down in place. I'm going to grab our little scrap piece of foam on the side here. I'm going to brush it into place. And then I'm going to use the table as my friend to hold it down and make sure everything is square and true. It doesn't hurt after about 10 seconds to give this a little wiggle, just in case you accidentally stick it to the table. A really cool tip to keep your hot glue from sticking to your table is occasionally coat your wood table with something like Camp Dry, which is basically a silicone layer, and the glue will dry and then simply fleck off. Now this is thoroughly dried, we want to go ahead and reinforce it just a little bit more. The hot glue will hold this, but in the case of a crash or something, it will break free quite easily. To make this even stronger, I'm going to go ahead and use about 8 inches of 2-inch packing tape, and I'm going to wrap the firewall to the power pod. Just pretend you're wrapping a gift here. I'm going to favor down right over where the foam is, kind of leaving those 2 extra holes on the very top alone. Oops, got a little crooked. Let's do it one more time. Just down like this. And the rest is just like wrapping a present. I'm just going to cut a relief on each corner. I like to kind of open up this part here, hold that in, and then down on both sides. There we go. Now would be a good time to also cut our little relief here. Some people will choose to go ahead and put that underneath it. I like to have it just as a little bit of way of pulling some air down through it. Our power pod's now done. Let's go ahead and put our motor on. Once we have our tape on, our last step here is to cut the relief out of the center hole and also where the wires are going to go through. If you plan on not using the X mount, you can also pop these 4 holes here for your screws to go through. Now with our power pod complete, I'm going to go ahead and pop open our radial. Now the Simple series can fly off of a C-Pack, but what I really love about the B-Pack is you have a very gentle, predictable experience on a 3-cell, and you can also go up to a 4-cell where you have a credible amount of power and energy. The nice thing about this is our new radials have a lot more power than our old B motors, but it also is 4-cell capable. So really what you're getting with a B motor is the ability to go from a beginner experience to a fast experience without changing your motors. Now I wouldn't recommend putting our B radial on something that requires a C because you're gonna have nose weight issues and also possibly fit issues for the prop to be in front of the airplane. In our radial kit we'll have our motor, we'll have our screw hardware, we'll have our prop nut, and we'll also have our X mount. Now keep in mind as we develop new motors and as technology changes, the motors may change in appearance, but just know if we say B power pack, C power pack, A power pack, F power pack, the equivalent that we have will work on your models. We always make sure that we have it. The only difference that you may have is how they're installed. The first thing I'm going to do with my motor is I'm going to go ahead and install my X mount, and what I'm looking here is for the Bevel Cut surface mount screws. It's going to look like these right here. Now with our X mount, a lot of times people have a little confusion and they don't realize that there's actually a 19mm spacing here and a 16mm spacing here. So they may drop the X mount down and say, hey, my holes don't fit, or only 2 of my holes fit, but the other 2 don't. All you simply need to do is rotate that 90 degrees and everything will line up for you. And I like to just start all 4 screws before I tighten them down. Makes them go in easier and less likely to cross thread. For me, using the X mount is the preferred way. It gives the motor a little bit of spacing on the backside so it can breathe even better, but it also makes it impossible for you to hit your windings by accidentally putting too long of a screw through the firewall and into your motor. There, all 4's in. Now from this point we have even spacing on all 4 of our remaining holes, and we're going to be using the wood screws to mount that to our firewall. To mount to our firewall, we're going to slide this right through. Like you see here. So rotate this up, and then we're carefully line them up with the 4 wood screws like you see here. Don't worry about trying to force this piece going through the hole. If it bends up too sharp, you may fracture those wires inside there. It's okay if it sticks out just a little bit. In our motor kit, you're going to find 4 wood screws. Actually 5, we give you an extra one. And all we need to do is drop it into the pilot hole. I like to just kind of pop it through just like that, and we'll start them all without tightening them down. Once we have all 4 of these seated, we can go back and just make them snug. I'm just going to go ahead and lightly turn this on because I don't want to lose my prop nut, but make sure at this moment you don't put your prop on. The rest of this hardware is hardware that you can save and use on a future project. One important thing is that we do have longer screws that can actually go directly into your motor. Make sure that you don't use your longer screws on a thin firewall or you could possibly hit the windings and damage your motor. Now that we have our motor installed, we're going to go ahead and install our FT electronic speed control. This is our 35 amp ESC that comes with our B and our C power pack. The nice thing now is with our Bs and our Cs, we give you the higher amp speed control so you can interchange them, so when you fly different models, you have common materials. So if you ever need to change anything or do a twin engine conversion, you have what you need. Let's go ahead and open this up. And we'll go ahead and plug this in. There we go. Now we don't need to worry too much if we have these plugged in backwards. If the prop spins the wrong direction, all we need to do is disconnect 2 of our wires and then switch those 2 wires and it'll make the prop run the other way. Another really cool feature of our FT ESCs is the accessory port. Now this is an older version here. Our new version 2s actually have a JST red connector that will help plug in directly and give you battery voltage. So if you put a 3-cell or 4-cell onto your airplane, it'll give you 3 or 4 cells to your accessory port. This is really handy if you're doing something like LEDs for night flying, making this go from an FT simple stick to an FT glow stick. Or if you want to run FPV gear that can take that voltage range. The important thing to know is whatever you plug in for your battery is the voltage it's going to give you. So make sure that you don't plug in something that can only go up to 12 volts and then plug in a 4-cell battery, or you could hurt the electronics that you plug in. Now that our power pod is done, we're ready to move forward and install it onto the airplane. To install our power pod, the first thing we want to do is we want to open up the channel that the power pod is going to slide into. All we simply need to do is go ahead and slide our razor right over to the outer thickness of the foam, go about 3/16 inches from the center, and we're going to guide this gently and carefully right down the side like you see here. Just pop that out, and if you cut a little on the inside, you can always trim it up to get it more flush. Once you're happy with the way it fits, we're going to go ahead and guide this right on through. Our power pod is going to slide all the way back through its channel until the firewall meets and stops at the edge of the fuselage. A very easy way to dress the fuselage is to flip this over, and we're going to cut out these vent holes. The only time I'd probably recommend maybe sealing this up with tape is if you're going to do our water conversion where you're flying this off of pontoons. In that case, put a piece of tape over those vent holes so it doesn't leak down through and get water up by your electronics. We're going to keep this all loose, and then when we get our landing gear in and we're ready to do our final hookup, I'll show you how you can very conveniently dress your wires so you have as much room as possible in the battery bay, and then you also have nice breathing for your ESC. Now would be a really good time to lock in our power pod and also put our wing dowels in so we have the ability to go ahead and remove the power pod and also attach our wings. To do this, first make sure that your power pod is seated all the way back against the front of the fuselage, and with a twisting motion, just pop in through the holes that are in the kit on all 4 sides. Don't try to press it from one side to the other, or you have a good likelihood of missing the holes. Once you've hit all 4 sides, you can then pass it straight on through and then trim it on the other side. For the power pods, I like to cut it only about an 1/8 inch from the edge, and for the wing hold downs, I like to give us almost a 1/2 inch on each side of the fuselage. Same process on the wings, but in this case, the holes are actually included, so they go from one side and they should go right through to the other side. The only difference is I'm going to leave about a 1/2 inch space to allow the rubber bands to grip onto the dowels. While we're working with dowels and on the fuselage, you can always flip this over on the back side. We'll open up our little vent hole if you haven't done so already. And included in our kit is this cute little dorsal right here. This is not only going to make things look nicer, but it's also going to get the tail just slightly off the ground. First thing we want to do is just give it a quick test fit, pushing over that dowel. We can come back with a little bit of glue. We're going to put it on both the high spots and the low spots. Press it down into place. All right, now that we have our little dorsal in place, I'm going to go ahead and follow up with a tiny piece of barbecue skewer here. This is going to be really nice. It's going to give us a lot of durability and also get that tail just slightly off the ground, which we definitely want. A little bead of glue. Set it down in place. Always come back afterwards, scrape off the extra glue. And give it about 30-40 seconds to dry. So I'm going to put the plane on its side here, and the next thing I want to do is put my attention towards the landing gear. Now if you're flying off of an area where the landing gear is only going to be flipping over the airplane, don't worry about putting this on. You can always hand launch this airplane. But we're going to show you how to put a landing gear on, and also I'm going to be pairing this airplane with our favorite 4.3 inch wheels. There's an affectionate term we have around flight test called stomping. That's where we put really big wheels on really cool airplanes and we go stomping around, landing on everything. It's kind of like stall with an RC twist. To make our landing gear, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and find the middle here. This is 15.5 inches long, so we're going to go to 7 3/4. For our friends with the metric system, that's going to be roughly 20 centimeters. Once we have the middle point, I'm going to take some heavy duty pliers here. I'm going to bend this down to about almost a 90-degree angle. I like to go a little bit over, and that way when I open it up to the angle, it keeps this edge nice and sharp. Included in our speed build kit is our little doubler for our landing gear. Just go ahead and slowly open this and adjust this until it meets up nice and neat right over the center. Before we glue this down, we're going to measure about 6 inches from each side. I like to favor the outermost portion of the wire right on the 6 here. I'm going to go ahead and mark that right there. Grip it with our pliers, and we're going to bend that up about 45 degrees. Same process on the other side. 6 inches favoring from the far side of the 6. We can then lay this down flat, and we can see that our landing gear is a little weird. The easiest way to fix this is by just kind of giving a little tug each way. You never have to get these absolutely perfect. And then I keep on twisting and adjusting until it lays nice and flat on the table. Almost there. And this one's good. This one just needs a little bit more angle up. And that looks good. Now that we have our landing gear made, I'm going to just take the edge of our landing gear and I'm going to slightly crush down right through the V on our fold. Like that. You can now kind of go ahead and get this ready to glue. I'm just going to go ahead and remove the center section. There we are. And we'll give this a test fit. Press this down nice and firm all the way to the far back side like you see here. Let's go ahead and make sure our C-fold completes and that everything sits nice and flat. And it does. I'm going to carefully remove this so I don't damage the foam too much. And my next step here is I'm going to put a nice heavy bead of glue right over that seam. I'm going to press this into place. At this point, you go ahead and glue the rest of it down. And I'm definitely getting a little bit generous on the glue because I want to smear this in and press it down firmly. To make this very durable, we're also going to go ahead and use our hot glue on the sides. Notice I'm just kind of going to use this like a paintbrush and paint this all around. That's going to really help this from not delaminating and give your landing gear a lot of strength. I'm going to do this on all 3 sides. Now typically this takes about a 2.75 inch wheel, which is also in our store that you can pick up anytime. But if you want to spend a few bucks more, you can get these big stomper wheels here, which are fantastic. One thing I'd strongly recommend, if you're going to use larger wheels, also pick up a set of wheel collars for your landing gear because you don't want to rely on hot glue to lock these in. Our next step is to install our landing gear. We're simply going to cut over right to the outer cheek here, leaving about 3/16 on the edge. And pop it out. Keep in mind you do have electronics under here, so you don't want to sink your razor blade in and accidentally cut a wire. And now we're just going to slide this right down in. It's going to have a nice little friction fit. And at the point where these guys come to meet the fuselage, just go ahead and cut through the corner on both sides. go. And then with the rocking motion, she'll sit right down in place. And at this point, you can choose to glue it in, or you can make this removable, especially if you want to go from wheels to floats. Let's go ahead and flip this over, and you can see why we call it a stomper here. It really gives it a really cool presence, has that cool stall look, but also if you're flying off a rougher ground or you love doing touch and goes, this is possibly one of the best planes to both land and take off for you. We love these big wheels, especially in all conditions. Our fuselage now is fully done. The next step here is we're going to go ahead and install our electronics, and for this one specifically, I'm going to be showing you how to install our FT Aura light. Now if you're not going to be installing the FT Aura light, that's no problem at all. In all of our other videos for all of our 60 plus airplanes, we show you how to make the connections on our receivers. We have a lot of people requesting to show how to do a hookup from beginning to end, including the models with the FT Aura light. Today we're going to show you how to do it, and the best part is you don't even need your computer. Although I'm setting up this plane with the Spectrum, the FT Aura 5 will work with many different receiver protocols. So you can use Radio Link, you can use FR Sky, you can use obviously Spectrum, Futaba. The biggest thing you need is a serial or an S-Bus connection. Now I'm going to be using the Spectrum to do this setup, but check out our other videos around the Aura because you'll learn how to hook it up to things like FR Sky and Radio Link as well. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is creating a new model. Next, I'm going to name this model Aura. And the really nice thing about this is all you need to do is have one model memory, and then you can buy many different airplanes because all the sub trims, the dual rates, and the features for that specific airplane are stored in the Aura board, not on the transmitter. So it really simplifies things, but also you can have something very advanced like a widgeon or a C-Duck with differential thrust and a bunch of capability, but also fly off of a sub $100 radio and have all those cool features into what you normally have to find in something like maybe a $300 radio. Now that we've named it, we're going to go ahead and go to our Servo Travel. And we're going to move over to Aileron. We're going to make it 125%. We're going to make our elevator 125%. And we're going to make our rudder 125%. There we go. Now if you're using FR Sky or Radio Link, you do not need to make this setting. We're going to back out of that. I'm going to go back in. Now I'm going to go down to System Setup. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to go to my channel assign. Right there. I'm going to go to my second page, so I'm going to click on next. And I'm going to set my gear switch to a 3-position switch. Now this can be any 3-position switch that you want. The one that I really like is in the upper left hand corner, and that's going to be switch C. So I'm going to go down to gear. Right now it's on A. I'm going to highlight that, and I'm going to flick on C. Now for features like differential thrust maybe in the future, that should have aux1 set to a 2-position switch. I'm also going to go down to that, and I'm going to put that on A. Alright, we can enter out of that. Our transmitter setup's all done. Everything from this point on can be done with our Aura board without the use of a computer. So let's go ahead and set this to the side. We'll unpackage our Aura and we'll install it. We're going to be using what we normally see in the quad world, which is a serial DSMX satellite receiver. Now this is going to give us a serial connection and simply plug and play. Our Aura is going to come with our USB cable, a male-to-male connector for things like FR Sky and Radio Link and other S-Bus connections, a couple pieces of double-mounted sticky tape, and our quick start guide. In order to make the Aura work, we are going to need to use a serial connection receiver. In this case, we're going to use our SPM 4648, but other satellite receivers will work, or S-Bus configurations. The important thing to know is that this is not a pass-through where you simply take it from your receiver down to the board, back to the control surfaces. This is actually going to work off of a serial or S-Bus connection. So make sure you have the appropriate receiver, and we do have that listed on our store. So we're going to go ahead and pop a piece of our double mounting sticky tape. This is going to go for the satellite. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut just a tiny little notch in the one corner here, and you'll see why in a second. On the Aura board, there's a tiny little switch on the back of the board here that houses the switches. We're just going to cut a notch so we can get a nice even fit all the way across here. Once we're happy with that, go ahead and stick this in. Now there is a free downloadable STL that you can print your own Aura 5 control board mount, and it actually can screw or glue in, and it's really nice. Our next step, we're going to be installing our Aura board. Now the important thing is if you're not going to be doing any kind of configuration changes, make sure that your Aura board is installed with the pins facing up and also towards the tail. So in other words, you want to make sure that the satellite port and the satellite connection is pointing towards the nose of the airplane, the pins are pointing towards the wing on the stick, and also favoring the back side of the tail. Another thing that's really important to point out is you want this to be nice and square inside your fuselage. So in other words, you don't want to mount this at a 45-degree angle. You want the sides of the Aura board to be parallel with the sides of the fuselage. So let's go ahead and install that now, right around roughly where the CG is, but it's not crucial that you have it lined up perfectly. Alright, so we're going to just drop this right down in. I'm going to put it right over the B-fold indicator here. I'm just going to take my time and make sure that we get it lined up as perfectly as possible. There we go. Just going to press that firmly down in place, just like that. For our satellite, we can stick the other little square piece on and use that to mount our receiver. I'm just going to kind of glide this right back in here. Along with the Aura board, you have this quick start guide. It's a lot easier to show you what we're going to be doing on this bigger picture than the actual Aura board itself. Our next step is to make our connections. Now the important thing is to take note that out of the box, this is the exact mapping that you're going to have on your Aura board. We have our throttle in Servo Port 1, we have our left aileron in Servo Port 2, right aileron in Servo Port 3, elevator in Servo Port 4, and rudder in Port 5. We're going to be wiring together our servos, so we're only going to need to use the left or right aileron port because both of our servo wires are wired together. Now you can choose to go ahead and go directly to that, but for this case, I'm going to go ahead and just wire them together and not worry about it. So our first section to do is to put throttle in the Servo Port 1. Also take note that the signal wire, which is going to be your white or your orange wire, is going to be on the top pin that's closer to the center of your Aura board. So we're going to go ahead and locate Servo Port 1. It's on the far edge. Here's our signal wire. We're simply going to plug that into place right there. Next will be our ailerons. I'm just going to go ahead and plug the Y harness that's included in our kit into Servo Port 2. I'm going to let that dangle over the side. Our next connection is going to be elevator, which is going to be this one right here. That's going to go into Servo Port 4, so I'm going to go ahead and skip Port 3. Again, making sure that the signal wires are all favoring the pin towards the center of the board. And our last one is the rudder, which is right here. And that's Servo Port 5. Just going to go ahead and tuck the excess wire right underneath the bottom here, just to kind of dress things up a little bit. And just to make things easy, I'm going to go ahead and make my connections with my wing now. Again, making sure that my signal wires line up. Just like that. All of our connections are made. Our next step here is to apply power, and I'll show you how to bind the radio and then also go into a quick set where we're going to adjust both our gyros and our servo directions at the same time. So now that all the connections are made, our next step is to bind the Aura, which has the satellite receiver, to the actual transmitter of the Spectrum radio. So to do this has an auto bind Spectrum receiver, so we don't need to actually hold down on the little bind button on the Aura board. All we simply need to do is plug it in and wait about 20 seconds. What we're going to be looking for is a flashing orange light right on the satellite receiver, and there it is. And I'm going to hold this about 4 feet away here, and I'm going to turn this on while I press it down on the bind button.
Binding. DSMX 22 milliseconds.
There we go.
Bind complete.
Give that about 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There it is. All right, so you can see that we have all of our connections, our elevator, our ailerons, and our rudder. Our next step after we bound this is now to put this into quick change mode. What quick change mode is going to help us do is going to help us to actually change our gyro direction, our servo direction, and also activate things like either elevon mode or even level assist mode right from the use of stick movements from your transmitter. Now keep in mind, you don't want to reverse anything on your transmitter. We want that all programmed into the Aura board, so the transmitter is simply something that will talk to your receiver, not something that actually adjusts the parameters of that. To get into quick change mode, we're going to hold down on the bind and the trim button at the same time. So there's our bind and our trim button. We're going to hold down this until we see a green light only. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There it is. I went ahead and put the wing on here just to kind of get everything assembled here, and I also position the plane exactly how I'd like you to do so when you're hooking this up. We're going to have the tail facing towards us, the nose facing away from us, and that way we can make sure when we give it right aileron, our right aileron should go up. That's correct. Left aileron, obviously left aileron goes up. When we pull back on the stick for the elevator, we should see our elevator go up. And that is also correct. Now the final thing we want to check is our rudder. When we push right on the rudder, we should see our rudder deflect to the right, and that's actually backwards. The way we're going to fix this is not going to be through the transmitter, through programming. It's actually going to be through holding a simple stick movement. In this case, we want to reverse the rudder. All we need to do is hold the rudder all the way over to the side for about 6 to 7 seconds. There we go, our rudder is now reversed. So all of our controls move the proper direction. If we mounted our board in the right orientation, we should also be able to see our gyros move in the proper direction as well too. To test this, all we need to do is simply pick up the airplane and we're gonna move it on its axes past 45 degrees. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna check my pitch. When I pitch up, I should see the elevator try to drive the nose down. So when I pitch the nose up, the elevator goes down, which means that will bring me back to level. When I roll the plane to the right, I should see the ailerons roll it back to the left, and that's exactly what I see. And now with the rudder, when I yaw to the right, I should see the rudder react with the yaw to the left. If at any point you have your servo direction moving the proper direction, nothing is reversed in your transmitter, but you see the gyros working backwards, most likely you mounted the gyro board in the wrong orientation. Make sure you go back and check that and remount it if necessary. Now because we're going to do a little bit of training and have people that maybe are a little bit nervous about aerobatics, I'm going to activate what we call level assist. Level assist will keep the airplane from banking past a certain degree, and that is adjustable through your configuration tool, but it's also going to bring you back to level in horizontal flight. Now keep in mind, this isn't a barometric lock where it's going to lock your altitude. It's going to actually just lock you at a level position, and I'll show you later on how to tune that and make that perfect. But for right now, to activate level assist while it's in quick set mode, all we need to do is hold down on the bind button for about 7 seconds. When we do so, we're going to see the controls cycle 2 times back and forth, telling us it's in the level assist mode. Okay. The top button is bind. I'm only going to touch the top button. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Release. There we go. At this point, all of our setup is done. We can go ahead and exit this, and the way we're going to do so is by holding both the bind and trim down at the same time for about 7 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Light went out. I release it. Flashing blue means rebluting. So let's go ahead and check out our 3 modes here and make sure everything works. Earlier I assigned my gear switch to this 3-position switch here. The top position or position 0 is going to be no gyros. So in other words, when I wiggle this around, you don't hear anything. And we have roughly 100-degree deflection. There we go. Position 1, which is going to be the middle, that is going to be our training mode or our level assist mode. So at this point, this should kind of always return us back to level or horizontal flight. So the way we're going to test this is when I pitch the nose up, you're going to see that the elevator stays and holds up until I bring it back to neutral. The same thing with my bank. When I pick the wing and bank it to the right, it's going to hold a direction of wanting to bring me back to horizontal, and that works good. Keep in mind also with level assist, the rates are less than what you have with aerobatic mode in position 0 or 3. Again, you can adjust the distance of your servo arm to dial this in to the throws that you want. But since it's an aerobatic airplane, I want all the throws I can get. Our final position, which is position 2, is going to be 3-axis mode. 3-axis mode is going to give us all the abilities of aerobatics. It's going to give us full throw deflection, but it's also going to take out the effects of the wind. So if you pick up the plane and wiggle it around, you're going to see that's going to try to stop that moment, but it's not going to try to return you back to level. So you'll just hear the controls wiggling, but not stay in one position. All 3 of our modes work. Our last step is to check the direction of our motor. Our motor does run, but it actually is running the wrong direction. So what I need to do is go ahead and switch 2 of the 3 connectors to make it run the opposite direction, which is counterclockwise in this case. Anytime you have a brushless motor and you need to reverse this direction, all you simply need to do is unplug with 2 of the 3 and then switch them. Changing these 2 wires actually changes the pattern of how the ESC talks to the motor to go from one direction to the other. So if you imagine the pattern being A, B, C, and you change any of the 2, it would go A, C, B, A, C, B, A, C, B, A. Our last step is to install our included Velcro in with our kit for the battery. I like to always say fuzzy fuselage, but you can choose prickly if you want. Where I'm going to go ahead and put this is going to be right in the center of the power pod, just like that. I have my 1300 milliamp 3-cell, which I strongly recommend if you're a beginner pilot, but if you want to go up to some crazy aerobatics, I definitely would recommend putting a 4-cell on. That's what we'll put on for our friend Andrus. We'll drop that in. Now it's really important to know that the position of the battery is going to be what helps define your center of gravity. So make sure that you have the battery within the battery range that we said, which is basically 1300 all the way up to 2200. And that also when you check your center of gravity, if you need to move the battery forward or backward, that's okay. Just go ahead and make marks once you have a great flying experience, and that way you'll know exactly where you can put your battery back every single time. Before I install the power pod for the final time here, I'm just going to go ahead and cut a little tiny notch here. And you can choose to do this if you want, but I really like the idea of my ESC being down below where it can vent out really easily. So I'm just going to kind of cut a little relief so this can guide right underneath here like this. And now what I can do is lay my ESC right over these little vent holes. Press it back, I'll just let those little guide wires kind of go back in there. I'll slide right back in place. Then we'll just lock it down. We'll take our wing up here, fasten it in place. And our last step is to install our battery. I'm going to go ahead and fly this off if it's made off of a 4-cell, but if you guys are newer, feel free to use a 3-cell here. I'm just going to place this up in the front. Close our little hatch. And then where I want to see the balance is going to be roughly right here, about a 1/4 inch past this seam right here. For your maiden flight, I strongly recommend having just a little bit nose heavy rather than a little bit tail heavy. You can always adjust it further back for the future, but a nose heavy airplane will fly poorly, tail heavy airplane will only fly once. And before we take it up in the air, we have to add the prop. It's always a really important thing to make sure you don't put the prop on until all of your electronics work properly and you're ready to take it out to the field and fly for the first time. That's going to avoid the unfortunate accident where possibly you bump the throttle or you have something hooked up wrong and the motor activates without you wishing to do so. So we're going to put on our prop nut here. For a little bit of added ventilation, we're also going to go ahead, we're going to open this up. I'm going to put a little drop of glue right here. Close our hatch, and we'll push this down. And we're going to hold this for about 30 seconds. This is going to give us the ability to allow cold air to draw through, keep our battery and our electronics cold. Alright friends, our FT Simple Stick is now ready to take off for the maiden. We have our center of gravity on, we have our controls all moving in the right direction. We even calibrated and set up our aura board. Next thing to do is grab my friend Andrus. We're going to go out and see how this flies. Alright, so we have the FT Simple Stick ready to fly here. I brought my dear friend Andrus out because this thing is insanely aerobatic. And he's going to show you what it can really do.
That's good, man.
Very good. Alright, let's drop it down here. Holy cow. All right, friends, we are back and the FT Simple Stick flew amazing. I'm sure yours will too. One thing that we didn't have to do is any trimming whatsoever. Now, if you guys do need to trim it and you did install your FT Aura 5 board, there will be a video linked down below on how to do all the trim setup that you need so you can lock in the sub trims and any kind of adjustments you need to do to make it fly well into your Aura so your receiver never needs to hold those values. As always, I want to thank you for being part of the Flight Test family. Hope you download the free plans or build the speed build kit, and we'll see you next build.